Welcome, everybody. My name is Elizabeth Hamblet. I am the author of Seven Steps to College Success, a pathway for students with disabilities. And I am delighted to be joined today by some colleagues and friends because this is being recorded in July, which is the time at which a lot of rising college seniors are starting to do their college searches. Maybe they're visiting colleges this summer. And I really wanted to take some time to ask these folks who are experienced in working with students with different kinds of disabilities, the kinds of things that families should be thinking about, questions they should be asking, stuff, especially, in the summer before somebody's senior year, the kinds of preparation that they should be doing in the year coming up. And so here we are. So we are recording this from a Facebook Live. So if you are currently watching us, go ahead and put your questions in the chat and I will try to get to them today. But in the meantime, I would love it if you guys would introduce yourselves. So just looking at the order of my screen, Marci, why don't you go ahead?
Hi, glad to be here. Thanks for having me, Elizabeth, and hanging out with Adrienne and Annie. I am a college counselor in Northern California, Thrive College Counseling, and I do several other projects. I teach a class at UC Irvine for college counselors, and excitingly, we use Elizabeth's book, which is really a treat to have in the class. So that's awesome.
Right there.
Yes. Um, and I also do some work at Stanford. They have a neurodiversity summit that they do every year, and I am a part of that process. So glad to be here with everybody.
Thanks. Annie?
Hey everybody, I'm Annie Tulkin. I'm the CEO of Accessible College. I provide college transition support for students with physical disabilities, so that might be wheelchair users, mobility device users, students with sensory impairments like blindness and visual impairments, hearing impairments, and deafness. And I also support students with chronic health conditions. So that is a big tent term. It could be things like Crohn's disease, diabetes, POTS, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and other kind of co-occurring conditions too. I often work alongside independent college consultants and high school counselors, and I'm super excited to be a part of this conversation today. So thanks for inviting me, Elizabeth.
Oh, it's always good to work with you, Annie. I love that. And Adrienne, please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Adrienne Frumberg. I'm the founder of Lighthouse Guidance, and I'm an independent educational consultant based in New York City and Connecticut. And I focus on working with students who need extra support in the college search process, whether that be for reasons of learning differences, neurodiversity, health conditions, physical disabilities, really anything under that umbrella that would necessitate that extra layer of figuring out the right college fit. And I've been working with Annie and collaborating since I would say as early as 2018 and then more regularly in 2020. And I also know Marci as well. So I'm excited to be here today and to answer any questions that come through. Thank you for having me, Elizabeth.
Well, thanks for joining us. And Adrienne does have many talents. I've asked her here to sort of take the role of advising students, parents of students with mental health disabilities. So we're trying to cover a range. If you're interested in college search and preparation for students with learning disabilities and ADHD, first of all, read my book. But also go to my YouTube channel if you'd rather watch than read. There is some webinars and interviews with some great folks there who specialize in that area. So ladies, getting started again, this is July. And perhaps some students are doing their search and starting to put a list together. So Annie, I'll start with you because I know this is certainly a big deal for the kinds of students you specialize in working with. But what are some things you think families don't think about when they are helping a student identify colleges that are a good fit? And I realize that's probably an hour's conversation right now, but if we could just get a couple of, prime
Yeah.
tips.
I think just in general, for any student with a disability, there's a huge difference between high school accommodations and college accommodations. The laws change from IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, to the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, which this July is the 35th anniversary of the passage of the ADA. And so one of the things that I think that people often don't think about is the fact that college accommodations are holistic. There's more to them that could be
Mm.
housing and dining accommodations in addition to academic accommodations. There might also be transportation and recreation accommodations. So especially if we're thinking about a student with a chronic health condition or a student with a physical disability, we need to be thinking about all areas of life, right? And just with any student, maybe with a learning disability or processing disorder, or other type of condition, also thinking about those executive function skills and some of those pieces as well too. So those are really key factors, which maybe your student got support with in high school, but those supports sort of aren't really there in the college setting. And so you need to be thinking about it comprehensively ahead of time so that the student is prepared and the parents are prepared as well.
Adrienne, again, looking at this through your lens for your students with mental health disabilities, what kinds of things aren't on the minds of themselves and their families?
I think there are many considerations in terms of the mental health piece. In terms of continuity of therapy, that's definitely one thing that some of my students have to consider. Will they continue with the same therapist and do telehealth? Will they instead like to find someone locally to their campus, which oftentimes the College Counseling Center will have a list of referrals based on the diagnosis of the student. So if someone would say like to walk off campus and have that in-person session, the counseling center will have a list of referrals. So there is information that can be found on every college counseling website, but it's always great also to reach out and have a phone call, and there'll be someone to speak to the family and or the student by phone, sometimes even by Zoom. Also, I have students who are interested in the idea of group counseling, and a
Oh,
lot of the counseling
interesting.
centers have themed groups. So say someone has a diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder, there may be an anxiety group that will be offered, say 6 to 8 weeks. Those groups, and then in terms of sort of brief therapy, which might be offered on a weekly basis, say for a semester, that would be included within the tuition. So making sure to have those questions handy for families. I do go through that with students just to make sure if they are reaching out that they're prepared with that list of questions to find out, like, what are the upcoming groups? What will be offered this semester? Or, if they want to have that in-person therapy, to make sure that they can have that all lined up well before they get there in August.
And one thing to keep in mind, and even I know this just as a learning disability specialist, is that the individual therapy provided by colleges is often limited in frequency per week and also in months that students can access it. So it's probably not a great long-term plan to assume that a student's going to be able to have counseling through the university's counseling center, throughout their hopefully 4 years. Marci, students with autism, what kinds of things are the families perhaps not thinking about?
I think a big piece for students to be particularly aware of, and this is, piggybacking a bit on what Annie was saying, is that that self-awareness of their
Mm.
learning strengths and challenges, their learning profile, and being able to articulate that. So, along with what Annie was saying, when they're meeting with disability services, they're going to have that interview and what is it that they need. But then also when deciding on a college, they need to understand who they are as a student and a
Mhm.
learner, what learning environments are best for them. Large lecture halls may be awesome for some, not for others. Those smaller classroom settings where the professor can get to know the student and see where they shine and offer them opportunities for research or internships, or you're not going to get necessarily get that at a very large school for
Mm.
every student. So looking at the learning environment, but the student needs to be aware of where they shine, and when they're thinking about colleges, to align their own strengths and challenges and their own learning profile with what each individual college has to offer, I think is really a critical piece to this process.
Got it. Adrienne, obviously, when students are looking at colleges, there are things that they want in a school. So, how do you have help them think about, what they really need to have versus what they want to have and how to strike that balance, right? No school is perfect for any one student. So, how do you kind of advise around that?
That's always a really difficult conversation to have. I have students who say they want that classic college experience, like a big campus with the large lecture halls and the big sports teams. But they are, say someone who would really, in my opinion, from all of the things that I've learned about them, benefit from a smaller or a medium-sized environment. So I think that often I'll suggest that the
Interesting.
students try to visit a different sampling of schools. So
Hmm.
visit that big school, go ahead, check it out, take a look, peek in the classroom to see that huge lecture hall. Sometimes students will be able to see classes in session. I've even had some students sit in on classes. I think that can be really beneficial, as well as then having them, if they're open to it, visit a small and a medium-sized college. Oftentimes the parents are completely on board with this because this allows them to make a more informed decision rather than to, lean on those videos that a lot of my students watch on whether it be YouTube or TikTok. It is important to go in person and experience what it's like, um, and to get a sense of what is the best fit for them. It is difficult sometimes, though, when they dig their heels in and say, like, no, I absolutely want to go to that 35,000 student undergraduate
Yeah.
school. That can be challenging. If they are insistent, I will say, like, there are ways to make a big school feel smaller, whether that be to consider joining a living learning community, like a themed housing opportunity, to look at the clubs and organizations on campus. Some of my students are very gifted or they're very talented academically and could consider applying to an honors program, which allows for smaller classes, honors housing, things like that, to make that large school feel smaller.
You brought something up that I'm sure a lot of parents, see their students doing. So, any advice for how to make good use of TikTok? And, like, are there good rules of thumb for when students are watching videos?
I mean,
How
I
to-
definitely have seen some great content. There are independent educational consultants who do reviews of schools after they go on tours. That can be really helpful to check out. Those are obviously people like who sit in the chairs that we do and are looking at a college through a different lens, rather than
Mm,
just focusing in on those student-driven videos that, sometimes they'll have to do with, like Greek life or other aspects of the university. Um, but I think, yeah, kind of teasing through the videos and seeing, like, who is the person that is creating this video and what are they
mm,
trying to convey here? What's the message?
yeah.
I do think YouTube can be a really great tool, in terms of checking out colleges. Sometimes the universities, most of them have their own YouTube channel, which will be videos about campus tours. Sometimes there'll be videos about, like, support programs on campus or student organizations. So if the university itself is putting out the content, and they'll also do that on Instagram or do reels and things like that, those can be a helpful tool in navigating the college search process.
Hmm. Hmm. Marcy, what kinds of things do you do to help them sort out wants versus needs?
A big piece with the population, the neurodiverse population that I work with, is the college readiness and looking at their dorm readiness. Can they wake up without prompting? Are they managing their medication on their own? Can they manage their own Wi-Fi use, or are parents kind of shutting off the internet at night, and a whole range of things, calendaring and such. And so that kind of leads to a discussion of distance from home,
I was
well
wondering.
as
Okay. Yeah.
the supports that a college offers. Most colleges are not going to offer knocking on the student's door and waking them up, but sometimes when the parents are nearby, if there's a problem and they can kind of I've worked with students that they had were at a college nearby. Things were not going as they wanted. The student came home for a semester to continue to build those skills, but was able to continue to matriculate as a college student and then built those skills. So that's a nice thing to be aware of. And so based on the college readiness skills, when I'm working with students, we'll create a college list that will have maybe they do want that 40,000 student spirit college, but we're not sure of the readiness. And then they have some other colleges that are maybe far from home, and then we'll have some with comprehensive support programs, maybe closer to home. And so we create a list that's very varied depending on how the student does their senior year with their readiness. And then at that decision time in the spring, we'll really come together and have a discussion around the student's readiness, and that guides where the student will deposit and plan on going. So it ends up being an open-ended conversation that's not only the student's wants, but the student's readiness, and we hope that it kind of comes together in the spring. And there's also the option of a deferral. So if the student really wants that larger school,
Mm.
but understands that they're not ready, they, will have that other pathway as a deferral. So those are elements that I work with families to look for.
Hey, Elizabeth, I had a little thought that just sort of popped into my mind, sort of based on what Adrienne and Marci were saying that I thought would be valuable to share. So I'm interjecting to share this, but
Go for it.
the so the piece about social media is really fascinating to me because for students with physical disabilities and chronic health conditions, there's a lot less visibility of
Mm.
those students in the college context in general, right? And so oftentimes I'll recommend like that students check out some people I follow on Instagram who are at specific universities
Oh, that's
who are
great, Annie.
sharing their stories because these sorts of narratives and personal experiences, especially around students who use wheelchairs or mobility devices, or students who experience limited mobility because of their chronic health condition, aren't often told, right? And so
Yeah.
when I find those influencers, and that's why I scan, the Instagram and the TikTok stuff to see like what's out there and what are people posting. For my students too, I have like a network of students who are currently in college, right? That I can always connect students who are prospective students to see like, is there someone at that university who you could talk to who can share their experience? And I tell students who are doing the college search to connect with the disability support offices and ask, are there other wheelchair users on campus? Are there other students with similar conditions? Can you reach out to those students and see
Mm.
if they'd be willing to connect with me? So it's not any sharing of personal information, but the
Yeah.
people on the university side can just check and see like, would those students be willing to share their experience with a prospective student? So that was one piece. And the other really important piece, which I think applies to students, neurodiverse students, students with physical disabilities, is the fact that high schools often provide one-on-one aides or paraeducators to support students, but colleges do not. Right. So for my students with physical disabilities who might have a one-on-one aide or a paraeducator to get them set up in the classroom, maybe to help with toileting and eating and support throughout the day, colleges don't provide that support. And for students who are neurodiverse, oftentimes a high school will provide a one-on-one aide or a paraeducator to keep them on track, to make sure that they're following through on tasks and assignments and things. That's not a college accommodation. So those are services that are provided in high school under IDEA, but not in college under the ADA. So that's really important, I think, for people to start to wrap their brains around.
And so part of that answer can be to register with your regional Department of Vocational Rehab, right, Annie?
Yes. Yeah. So Voc Rehab, it is Voc Rehab, just the quick and dirty overview of Voc Rehab. It's a federal program that then the funds go out to each state. Each state administers their own vocational rehabilitation program. They all have different names. It might be Division of Rehabilitation Services. It could be like DARS, Division of Accessible Rehab Services. There's all sorts of names depending on your state. But if you put in vocational rehabilitation and your state name into Google, you'll find the right place. Um,
And be aware that states do things differently as well. So just because your
yes.
friend in the next state Yeah. I'm sorry.
That
Go ahead.
no, that is a huge piece of the puzzle, right? So states contribute their own funding too to voc rehab services in their state. So one state may offer more services and supports than another state offers. And that could be, it could be an aide, a classroom assistant for your student. It could be a computer or, paying for books or even paying for in-state college tuition. So there are some resources that vocational rehabilitation might have. Those resources might also be income level dependent. There's a lot to
Mm,
unpack. We could talk for hours about,
yeah.
about that piece, but a lot of families aren't aware of this. Most high schools, public high schools, generally have a connection with what is known as pre-ETS or pre-ETS, which is the pre-employment transition support program through voc rehab. But oftentimes, school counselors only consider that program for students with intellectual and developmental
Right.
disabilities or more severe cases of autism. And they don't often think of students with other types of disabilities who might also qualify for it. So parents and students might want to do their own research to see if they qualify for services through their state's vocational rehabilitation program too.
So thank you for all of that. And then, when it comes to wants versus, needs, how do you advise students?
Oh my gosh,
I
that is
know.
it's such a tricky question, right? Because I
Yeah.
often joke like you've seen one college, right? You've seen one
Yeah.
disability support
That's
office, you've seen one disability support office, and same
hmm
with students, right? Needs really vary, and some of these things are really personal. So I work with some students who need personal care attendants on campus to help them with getting dressed, with bathing, with other activities of daily living. There are only two colleges in the US that provide personal care attendant support programs as
Wow.
of their program. The University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and Wright State in Dayton, Ohio. They're both very different in the sorts of levels of care that they provide. But there's about 4,500 colleges in the US. So at every other school, any student who needs a personal care attendant has to hire, manage, and fund their own PCAs. And so, in fact, I'm actually doing a webinar series coming up in mid-July, which will be recorded. So if you're watching this in the future, um, we'll put a link down below so that you can check it out. But it's with students who have hired their own PCAs and managed that process. Because again, like that's another story that's not being told. That's a whole college experience that people are having. And it's a lot because
hmm
you're a student and then you're managing a personal care attendant and there's a lot to figure out and unpack. Um, but that's one of the things I think that is sort of missing from the conversation. But I tell my students to approach their search just like any other student, based on their interest. What are
Yeah.
you interested
Right.
in?
Right.
Where do you want to be? What are you looking, what sort of vibe, campus vibe are you looking to explore? And then we can work backwards from there to figure out what's going to be the best fit holistically. Because like you said at the beginning, there is no perfect college, right? There's no perfect place for anyone. But this is where the accommodations can come in to actually support a student and allow them to have access to the things that they want to have access to. So that's an important piece of the puzzle.
And thinking about the population that you work with, parents, I am now old enough to be the parent of two college graduates, and went to college in the 80s. But I think parents should be aware too of how much has changed and developed at colleges since we were all there. As far as their ability to, not even necessarily as an accommodation, manage things like nutritional, food service for students with all sorts of bowel conditions and allergies. They're set up for this stuff. So I think parents in particular should, will be surprised and hopefully pleased with what they find. Um, and so, oh gosh, I had a million questions that were going as I was thinking about this, but so thinking about what Annie said, because this is, I don't do college consulting at all. But when I wrote my book, what the consultants I spoke to said, and the disability services directors too, was that they recommend, as Annie said, you pick the school that meets all of your needs and wants, and then you can focus in. One of the on the disability services office, and my guess is that depending on the student and the disability, a lot of them don't care. They just want to know they're going to get their accommodations. They're not going to visit. They don't want to meet with anybody, and they love the fact that once they register with us, if they've even walked in the door, they probably never have to again for the rest of their time at school. It's all electronic communications. But I suspect that you may run into people who assume that if their student has a disability, they need to find a school with a fee-based program, right, Marci? Especially for students with autism. So let's talk a little bit about how do you advise people about, whether or not they're going to need some kind of paid program.
Yeah, so it's kind of picking up on what I was saying before about the readiness piece. And the biggest piece of this is the student's self-awareness of when they need support or when they don't understand something, and their ability to independently, without prompting, ask for help. So that like sentence right
Self-advocacy.
there, and I have to add in a timely way. So it starts with that self-awareness of, oh, I'm confused in this math class or whatever, and then knowing that they need to reach out, knowing who to reach out to. So that involves so many things, the communication skills um and just that feeling okay with asking for help. I work with so many students who they do not like to ask for help. They see it as a deficit and it means I don't know. And that's something I work with my high school students on, really trying to shift that mindset and really understanding self-advocacy is a skill that you absolutely want as a college student and as an adult, and it's a human thing to ask
Hmm.
for help, and really reinforcing that. So really helping the students understand that skill set of asking for help, and if they can have that, so I can know that if they go to a college with a comprehensive support program, that they will actually show up, because you can
Yes.
put students in a college and
Oh, for
register
sure.
and all of that for a comprehensive program, but if they don't have that basic skill, that has to be thought through. But if they are able to navigate self-advocacy in multiple areas, so social self-advocacy, academic, et cetera, mental health self-advocacy, um, then, like I was saying earlier, we have college lists that might have that comprehensive program, or and colleges that don't. And it's really about the readiness of the student, really looking at their learning needs. So every comprehensive program is different. Some are going to focus much more on academics, some will have more of a social piece. So, really looking at the match with the student. But honestly, there are a number of really wonderful virtual support programs that if a student loves a college that doesn't have a built-in comprehensive program, and they are a student who can do well on Zoom check-ins and their support that way, that could be awesome. So, and then again, staying close to home is always another option, because the student's high school team of tutors or EF coaches and therapists can remain in place. So, so the comprehensive programs are like nice to explore, but they're not must-haves. There's so many variables that connect
Yeah, I
with
think
it.
that's important. I think too many people start with, if you've not heard of the K&W guide to schools for students with learning differences, I think, people think you just go to the list in the back and that's how you do your college search. Um, Annie, I mean, not a lot of fee-based programs for the students that you specialize in, I would think.
No, none. But
Okay.
here, so, and this is the interesting part, Elizabeth, when we were, as this conversation's been going. So, Elizabeth, you and I have the experience of being people who work in disability support offices, right? So I was the associate director of Georgetown's disability support office for several years. And one of the things that you said earlier too about like sort of the way that students engage with disability support offices and how they hope it's sort of automated, right? Like, so they hope that it's just like, okay, I give my documentation, I get approved, and then everything from there is sort of email automation. And there is a lot of automation for a lot of students, right? So if a student has more typical accommodations, right, like extended time on tests, a note taker, those might be more sort of automated accommodation experiences. But for the students that I support who might be multiply disabled, right? They might have multiple types of
Mm,
conditions, right? So they might have a learning disability, a co-occurring chronic health condition that has unpredictable flare-ups, and physical disabilities, right? Where they maybe have limited mobility and things like that. Those are not automated things, right? There is often a lot
yeah.
more engagement with the Disability Support Office, or the student might want a lot more
Mm,
engagement with the
good
Disability
point.
Support
Yeah.
Office because some of these things like require follow-up, right? So like if a student is approved for an accommodation for flexibility in attendance or extensions on assignments because they have a chronic health condition like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome that is unpredictable and they have a flare, they might be approved for the accommodation, but then they still have to connect with their professor. They still have to follow up and figure out how they're going to make up that work. Like there's a lot more that happens. And oftentimes the people in the Disability Support Office might be an assistance in those situations, right? To help facilitate those conversations with students and professors, or be a go-between to help the professor even figure out what to do, or to help the student figure out how to navigate the situation. And I think sometimes people don't realize that there is that sort of guidance and support piece that
Mm,
students might actually need from the Disability Support Office, which might then impact the school that the student chooses. Because if the student is looking at the Disability Support Office, and we know people on this Zoom right now know this, 21% of college students report having a disability. And that's a lot of people at any given college. It's usually somewhere between 10 and 20% of students who are requesting accommodations, undergrads. That's a lot of people.
that
And
is a lot.
so, the people in the Disability Support Office might have a lot of things on their plates and going on. And so a student might choose a school if they have conditions that are more unpredictable, where there's more touch points, where there's more ability to talk to those people, where they don't have to wait a week or a two to get an appointment or to get a reply to an email. And so that could be a factor in someone's search.
I just saw a number today in our community of somebody who responded who said that they have 500 students on their caseload.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, there's a report that we have access to as members of this community. I actually don't know. It might be publicly available, but the problem is like they give an average caseload and the average number is somewhere around 135, I think, but the range of caseloads for these offices would surprise a lot of people. Adrienne, so fee-based programs, I know you mentioned that some colleges have groups for certain kinds of things. Are there any fee-based ones on campus that you know of for mental health?
I'm trying to think. I would say the vast majority of counseling center driven groups are included in tuition.
Mm,
Um, in terms of other programming that is not included in tuition, I know Marcy can speak to this too, but I do have some students who need support from the social side. So social support, fee-based programs are something that some of my students seek out and find very helpful. And they might be doing fine academically and okay with that piece, but getting out of their dorm room is challenging, and
mm,
needing to have that additional support is something that I have faced before with families. And I will say that sometimes the student is happy to just kind of be gaming or be in their room. Maybe they're getting straight A's, but they're home at night on the weekends. They're not really doing anything. And that's something that the student might be okay with, but the parent will then be, kind of reaching out to me that first semester and saying, like, they're not getting out, they're not meeting people. So sometimes those fee-based social support programs can be a real help.
yeah. And so, I have boxed you into this place, but as somebody who also advises students with learning disabilities and ADHD, do you have families who come in sort of focused on those fee-based programs and you?
I do, and like what Marcy said, I mean, I don't like to say that's a limiting factor because there are other programs, third-party programs that they can look into. So some families will say they will feel more comfortable if it's on campus and the
Mm.
student can walk in because it is a little bit easier to avoid something if it's online sometimes. So I definitely do have people that consider those fee-based programs on campus though, and sometimes they'll be meeting with a learning specialist or someone on campus twice a week. And I think sometimes families do struggle with the communication. I know we talked a lot about self-advocacy. I am working currently with some of my seniors in signing those waivers so the parent, can have access, even as something as simple as like logging into the payment portal. I had one student who was taking an online class this summer and was dropped from the class because she didn't pay her bill and wasn't checking her email and didn't allow her parents to have that consent. So there are definitely a lot of things to consider, but I think those support programs on campus, those fee-for-service programs, they do encourage parents to be able to, be in communication. So Marci, I'm sure you can comment on that too, but that's something that is a conversation I have to have with families.
Yeah, for sure. And I just want to add, picking up on what you're saying, is some families and students really benefit from like eyes on them. Like when they show up to that program, to that support,
Agreed.
comprehensive support program, there is somebody is seeing them. Have they showered, or the things that might have been missed in a Zoom call. So again, it's just a qualitatively
Mhm.
different piece that is offered that not every student needs, but maybe the right, a particular student. We really do want that in person, but then they again need to be able to show up and Adrienne, also what you're saying with those consents, that's another thing, like you were saying about the comprehensive support programs. I think a vast majority of them will, if you're going to apply and attend that, I think the vast majority will
Mm.
ask the student to sign that consent so that they can offer the comprehensive supports that the student needs.
And something for folks to be familiar with. So we're talking about students signing privacy releases. So generally, and depending on the school, a lot of schools, the only thing they will send the parents without the student's permission is the bill, if in fact the parents are paying the tuition bill. And then there are things called Family Educational Rights Privacy Act, FERPA, releases that allow certain, specified members of offices or people at offices, or some of them, they vary from college to college, whether they're university wide, to communicate. But what it doesn't mean, and people in my field say this all the time, a FERPA release does not create a FERPA obligation. And what that means is parent families, disability services folks might be able to respond to a question from a parent, but it doesn't mean that they are expected to have access to information. For instance, they may not have any idea how your students' grades are. They may not have any idea if your student has shown up to class, whether they've left the dorm. And so it's important to understand the limitations of those releases. It doesn't mean parents, I mean, I guess they literally always can email professors, but professors are not obligated to reply to them. And so I think this is actually a really nice way to circle into, gosh, in the last 20 minutes, the subject of preparation. Now, I do want to say we have a live question here. Are CTP college transition programs worthwhile if the teen has done summer work programs twice and the job coach thinks he's worth ready? So the parent doesn't think the teen is prepared for college, although they say they have many independent living skills. So I'm not, sounds good. But do you have any experience with these college transition programs?
Can I
Go
just
ahead, Annie.
interject in it for a second?
Yeah.
So the CTP usually is about a specific type of transition program, comprehensive transition for post-secondary students.
Okay, that's what the parent told me. Yeah, because
And
I had to
it's
ask.
and
Okay.
it's usually around intellectual and developmental
Okay.
disabilities.
Yeah.
And so the family might be interested in looking at the resources that Think College has,
Right.
our good friends over there.
Yeah.
Um, but also, it sort of depends on the student and the program, right? And I think like There's probably some, Marci, do you have experience with that piece?
I definitely work with students where we look at their academic readiness to handle like 4 years of college level work. And that's a question that it's not my job to answer. I don't do those assessments and such. But it's a guidance piece of really working with the parent to work with the school who did the assessment, for the IEP, et cetera, and really have that conversation. It doesn't mean that the student doesn't go to a 4-year college, but we want to be aware of various opportunities for that student. So, for example, taking community college classes might be a nice start, and there are a number of community colleges. I just did a webinar with this for at IECA on community colleges that offer housing. So the student can move away from home to have that campus away from home experience, but they're not necessarily doing that higher level of academics that might be a fit for them. There's also a lot of work being done on micro credentials where, again, you could go to a college campus, you could have that college life, but you're taking classes that are going to lead you to credential, you could stackable credentials and really get a job. So there's so many different opportunities when we say going to college. It doesn't have to be that 4-year liberal arts college where the students academic preparation may not be a fit for that. So I don't know if that helps, but there's definitely a number of pathways for a family to explore.
And to that parent, at the end of this, I'll ask all of these consultants to let us know, and we'll drop their URLs in the chat when we get done, so you can ask some follow-up questions if you want. Adrienne, any thoughts on summer programs, transition programs?
Yeah, I do have a lot of students who consider doing summer programs that are preparing them for the transition to college. Some of them will be focused more on the life skill piece, the executive functioning components. I do have other students who will take part in interest-based summer pre-college programs. And even in that case, I do think it's a great dry run to see what it's like to live in a dorm, to be responsible, to wake themselves up, to go through the whole day, like following a schedule. So they are really valuable. And I do see a lot of the students that I work with considering those. Sometimes if there's an interest-based program, it's like an online program. I do have students who will pursue those, but I do think those in-person experiences are particularly valuable, especially for those students who have other diagnoses and really need those experiences to get away from home and to really try it out to ensure that, in fact, they can do it. I have had students, I'm thinking about someone 2 years ago who was sure that he was going to be fine doing a summer program, but in the first week, he misplaced his laptop. And that was a great jumping off point for a conversation with the parent to discuss what are the things that need to be worked on to make a successful transition. I know Marci used the term, whether it's college capable or college ready. Yes, that student was academically maybe ready for college, but the life skill piece was definitely lacking and was something that had to be discussed before going off to college.
So we got a question in advance, Marci did, about a specific situation, but I'm guessing it's not unusual. So the parent wrote to ask, how do you support students who've been, because we're doing this in July, accepted to college and want to matriculate in the fall, but are having difficulty taking the steps needed to move forward? I mean, as somebody who doesn't, work on the high school end at all, my immediate thought was, oh my gosh, this sounds like a student who maybe needs a little bit more time starting, but you guys have the experience. So Marci, this came to you. So why don't we start with you?
So it's not, as you, I think, were saying, it's not an uncommon challenge. And I think we've all dealt with that where the student has everything all lined up. They've decided where they're going to go off to college, but then they become overwhelmed, shut down. They want to take on the independence, and they recognize that their friends might all be managing the housing piece and doing all of those pieces themselves, but they are struggling. They may not have the skill set to do it, but want to be able to do it, and then they might get stuck in that, and that would be a self-advocacy piece. where the student may not have developed the comfort with the self-advocacy that is critical to college readiness.
Mm.
And so sometimes when we see these bumps in students, it is an opportunity for a conversation about readiness, about adjusting a path, about having the student, are they open over the summer to accepting more support, to asking for support to navigate that? Or are they not ready for that and maybe considering, well, let's do a deferral. And oftentimes families or students might have a therapist or some type of other, high school counselor that they could reach out to help guide this on the readiness and decision making. But there's always an out, right? Like schools will want to work with students. Schools do not want a student who's obviously not ready for college, they're not taking these steps to come on their campus. They want to work something out. And so I hope families understand that and will take advantage of what the college has
Mm.
to say. I know a family that they were dropping their kid off, and then the kid was like, "Yeah, this is not going to work." And the school was
Aw.
wonderful and like,
Aw.
"Okay, we get this." And they got a deferral. The student did really well in that year and then matriculated and but it happens for students at different times in different ways. And I think just having an openness that there's not one right way. And if this is going on for a student, let's just meet the student where they're at and guide them.
And I think it's important too to to kind of share with the student how brave it is to decide like I am not ready. That I'm sure it's a very hard thing for a student to say, but probably a lot more of their peers should. Uh, Adrienne, you want to add something?
I was just going to add on here that yes, I definitely have students who seek deferrals and plan structured gap year programs. I find that the challenges arise when the student and or the family have an unstructured gap year plan with nothing lined up with, oh, maybe I'll get a
Um,
job, maybe I'll get an internship. But without a plan, it can be, I would say, like setting the student back further. So, in my opinion, a gap year can be incredibly valuable. Colleges are very receptive to a 1 year deferral. And so, planning out something that can highlight those deficits or sort of improve upon those deficits is really important. I'm working with someone at the moment who is trying to work on some of those executive functioning skills and is open to maybe doing one program in the fall and planning a different gap year program for the spring and then going to college for that following fall. The other thought is if the student is not requesting a deferral and is not planning or has not been accepted to college, they can maybe take a class or two at a local community college to see how that goes. Like if they aren't sure that college is the path for them, having the chance to take a class and see how it feels after high school is very important and can be really insightful. So I will suggest that to students. Sometimes colleges do put some red tape around taking college classes. So if they are requesting a deferral in the fine print, it might say you cannot take credit bearing classes at another college. So if they are looking at a deferral, to make sure to really read through the parameters around that.
And just for people who are watching us live, and then for those who will watch this on YouTube, I am dropping in the comments the links to everybody's website, and also links to College Parents Central, the blog there. There's a post on deferrals. I have added links about fee-based programs. There are 2 free blog posts. You can learn more about fee-based programs in step 5 of my book. I will now add the webinar that my friends Jason and Jane Soroyan do every year on gap experiences for students specifically with learning disabilities and ADHD. But there are lots of different resources out there that you guys can be going to think about it. And so with just a few minutes left, I think too, this also plays into the readiness piece. One thing that I think we need to think about it, and I think Marci alluded to this too, that students' own sense of their own college readiness and preparation may be affected by the things that adults around them are doing for them. It can really, I think, shield or mask how much support students are getting and therefore how much they need. So Annie, we'll start with you. What are some accommodations or supports that you see happening at home and at school? And again, I realized, that that's a full conversation, but that you would love to see parents start to be more conscious of and think about trying to scale back to give their students the best possible,
Yeah.
preparation for college.
No, it's a great question. I often think it's like allowing students to understand what's happening behind the curtain, right? Like a little Wizard of Oz moment of like, how does the lunch get into the backpack, or how do the clothes end up in my drawer? What are the steps that are being taken to support some of those pieces, right? Because for a lot of the students that I work with, especially if they have more complex medical conditions, right? Parents, guardians, family members have been like a huge part of their life, throughout that process, and to make sure that they have what they need. And so some of it is just second nature. And sometimes students don't realize like all of the work that is going into these pieces because they're not brought into the conversation, right? So some of it might just be like bringing your young adult into the conversation about the things that are going on behind the scenes that make their life run more smoothly. And then more concretely, I would say like looking at the areas of their life where they might need support with the independent living skills. Medication is a big one, probably for all of our students, right? Medication management is a huge one. Do they know what medicines they're on? Number one. Do they know who their doctors are? Do they know how to get a refill? Are they tracking their own medicine, or does mom or dad put it out for them every morning and make sure they take it? So we need to start building up those skills. And a lot of the work that I do is around coaching students and families and thinking about, okay, how do we start building those skills and creating accountability while you're at home and you have a supportive environment before you get to college? Because those are going to be the skills that you need to work on now to help you live more independently once you get there. And if a parent or a guardian identifies some deficits in that and we need more support, then we can think about other ways to support that, right? But like we have to give the student a chance. I think oftentimes I have to encourage parents, and I'm a parent too, so no diss to parents, to lengthen the leash a little bit to say, like, okay, we need to let your student sort of start to figure this out by themselves a little bit while they're still under supervision, so that they can make a mistake and learn and figure it out and navigate next steps, right? That's part of everybody's process of learning.
Uh,
So those are I think
uh,
important pieces: independent living skills, medication management, continuity of care, doctors, that
right.
kind of stuff.
And so, Adrienne, something Annie said, and I love the book, I always love The Self-Driven Child, excuse me, The Gift of Failure by Jessica Lahey. And I understand that when parents have a student with a disability, often they have had some really challenging experiences and we're trying to shield them from frustration and failure again. But I would think too, when it comes to students with mental health disorders like anxiety and depression, there's even more of a tendency to try to make things, smooth things and make things easier. And Annie's talked, I think, a lot about things that happen at home that perhaps
Mhm.
are fairly general, but between home and school too, do you see folks giving accommodations that, for instance, are not going to be available to your students at college level, or that are just counterproductive to helping them manage their, regulate their emotions or, so.
I mean, yes, definitely. I think a lot of the things that Annie mentioned carry over to those students with mental health concerns, like um, showing up for meetings, waking up. If someone has a depression diagnosis, sometimes waking up and getting out, it can be really challenging. That's definitely something that I see even with clients. I had a student today who unfortunately wasn't able to show up for a session due to that exact reason, which is the waking up can be really challenging. So I often with the student will do an inventory. I know Marci mentioned also like a readiness assessment. I do sort of like a benchmarks for transition self-assessment for the student to see where they think they are lacking in certain areas, and how can we get from the point where we are now to the point where you need to be come August to go to college. Like, what are the deficits and how can we work on these things? So the key really is to start on those things, like Annie said, lengthening the leash and starting early. Like, waiting until the summer before going to college does feel like a bit of a rush, and that you're playing catch up. So reviewing that self-assessment during, it could even be during the latter part of junior year, so you have that year to practice those skills and to be ready. Because if you aren't able to wake up, or you aren't able to take your own medication, it will be very difficult to successfully transition to college on their own.
And for those who are new to this, there is flexibility with attendance sometimes for certain kinds of conditions, but there are always limits to that. They may instead get priority registration, which allows students to have a better chance at registering for classes at times that are better for them, but doesn't guarantee them that. And obviously, as students move, into specialized areas as they go into their major, there may be only one class section available. And if that professor teaches at 8 o'clock in the morning, that's when class is. So starting to educate yourselves as a family about the kinds of accommodations that are and aren't commonly approved, I think, is an important part of this conversation. And Marci, just, bring us home, so to speak, about, things that families might be doing that are well-intentioned, and schools as well, that may be, counterproductive.
Yeah, so a little bit of a quick roundabout way to answer that. I try to take a strengths-based approach with the students and helping them really connect with their strengths, and then looking at their challenges and seeing, are there times when their challenges are getting in the way of their ability to shine with their strengths, like their academic strengths. And so if they're not able to wake up independently and they can't show up for class, they're not able to shine with their academic strengths. And it's kind of taking that thinking so that the student will be more on board with working on some of these things. And then more directly to answer your question, then looking at things like students that I work with that I get concerned about is more the academics at a school, if it's a small private school, or there's a variety of different learning environments for students in high school where they can retake tests like multiple times. The student takes a test, doesn't do well, then they correct the test, and then that's the grade. And so that is not giving an accurate view of what it's going to be like for that student in college to take a test. And so those kinds of things, but then it's hard for a student. This is why I brought up the strength-based thing, to be like, why would I not do that? I'm getting this great grade, and helping them understand the thinking about why it's something to work on, whether it's the test taking or other accommodations that or other things that the parents are doing, like prompting them to wake up, or other things like that that are not going to be happening in college, that they're motivated and we have the students buy in to work with it, I think is just so important.
I think that that's a really good point. Why would they make changes? And so again, if you want to learn about accommodations that are and aren't commonly approved, oops, I'm so bad at this. Oops, step 7. Step 7 of my book, and also in my on-demand webinar on academic accommodations. So, I think that there's a lot of hopefulness in this discussion. Students with all kinds of disabilities are going to college, and they're doing really well. But the whole point of this conversation was to try to make sure that families know what students can expect, are thinking about those things realistically as they look at colleges and as they do the preparation. So I thank you all. We did have a question about transition assessments, but I think we're gonna run out of time for that. But I will also mention here, and I'll drop it in the comments, my friend and colleague Kelly Shallon is a transition specialist, and she's got an amazing blog going on Substack, and she talks a lot about transition planning. That is what she does. And so there's some stuff in there, I think, recently about transition assessments. So I'll drop her link in there. But I have put your websites in the comments, but anything to wrap up or how best to get in touch with you? Annie, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, www.accessiblecollege.com. And you can follow me on Facebook at Accessible College and Instagram at Accessible College as well. And Adrienne and I have a Facebook group called College Success, Physical Disabilities, Chronic Health, and Mental Health that people are welcome to join. And I put a link in the comments as well.
Adrienne.
Annie, did you already drop our link or do you want me to drop the Facebook? You did?
I already did, so it's in there.
Thank you. You can find me at www.lighthouseguidance.co, and I'm also on Facebook at Lighthouse Guidance NY, and for Instagram at Lighthouse Guidance as well. So I look forward to connecting with anyone that has further questions. Thanks so much, Elizabeth, for having me.
Thanks. And Marci.
You can find me in more information about me and the work I do at thrivecollegecounseling.com. And thank you for having me. This was really great. It was a great conversation. So I'm hoping it was helpful to those listening.
I'm sure it will be. I love listening to my colleagues. I learn something every time. And I also run a Facebook group. It runs differently than Adrienne's and Annie's. It's not very open for sort of general advice from other parents. But if you want to get a realistic view from the disability services side of this transition, that's what we specialize in. And I'll drop that link here. But oh, and I will try and find and drop the Stanford Neurodiversity Summit, which is coming up in a couple of months. So there's so much good information out there, folks. Try to find the people who really know what they're doing. There are a lot of folks out there offering it. Vanny's laughing. Lots of folks out there offering advice, but not everybody has the insight and the experience of really specializing and working with these students. And I think, the more students everybody works with, the more we learn about what's possible and, what needs to be addressed. So with that, I will thank you all for attending here on Facebook, and we'll see you next time.